in that arena, puffin' Pasadena. He read the grass was greener.
What if I told you that you could get a fully functional computer shipped to your house for just $32? Well, this is just it. What you see here is an HP G511 Chromebook, which can be found commonly on eBay in C-grade condition for under $40. I got it, and surely enough, everything was checked in working condition as advertised, aside from some light scuffing and markings around the chassis. But it was in better condition than I expected it to be. So I spent about the last month using this Chromebook as my only school computer, and I think I can review it now and tell you if this is a good buy in 2022. The specs of this Chromebook are nothing crazy as you'd expect. Inside is an Intel Celeron N3060 processor clocked at 1.6 GHz, combined with 4 GB of RAM and 16 GB of internal storage, and Intel HD at 400 graphics. The only somewhat respectable configuration here is the 4 GB of RAM, as many lower-end Chromebooks only have 2, which I find completely unusable in 2022. I found that I could easily keep a normal school workload open, including Google Docs, D2L, maybe YouTube video, Google Slides, and I handled it just fine. Although predictably, if you have multiple windows open and you try to do heavy multitasking, some things will start loading in and out of memory. What's majorly apparent here is that this RAM goes a lot farther on ChromeOS than it would on Windows, for example. However, this is no thanks to the hardware itself. What ChromeOS doesn't help us much for is just real-world performance. This is a Celeron from 2015 and that has no hyper-threading. All you have are 2 weak cores driving everything about this computer. Every website I use on my Dell Inspiron takes noticeably longer to load on the Chromebook. YouTube videos often take a while to get up and running, and one glaring performance drawback was in Google Docs, strangely enough. I have upwards of 40 pages of notes from my sociology class, and it chugs trying to load it all in. And it even freezes for a few seconds while I try to find a word or phrase in the doc. I rely on this machine for note-taking and studying, and having this issue was kind of annoying. One other annoying performance hit was that I was required to join a Microsoft Teams meeting for a class once, and this laptop physically was not able to do it. I had to get on my iPad and join Teams that way out of desperation. And it made me miss just how fast the A15 Bionic is. And looking at benchmarks, we can see why this computer is so slow. In terms of raw performance, it barely outclasses a Pentium D. And here I have a Core 2 Duo based laptop, my Dell Adamo 13, and despite differences in software, the 17-watt Core 2 Duo from 2009 easily outperforms this HP's Celeron. To be clear though, a modern CPU has many advantages over a literal Pentium D. For example, you have hardware acceleration that can drive things like H.264 and VP9 video codecs. This is something you will find in no Core 2 Duo or Pentium from 2010 or earlier. This allows this otherwise slow Celeron to play 4K video somewhat smoothly, and that's not something any Core 2 Duo could say. All in all, it's an acceptable performance package for what the price is, although it means nothing until the rest of the laptop sucks, right? Foreshadowing withholding. So let's talk about that. Up top is a classic 11.6-inch 1366 by 768 TN screen, which is fine, I guess. It's not super sharp, it's super washed out, and has horrible viewing angles, but it does get reasonably bright. I call this screen classic because it's used in basically every small Chromebook in existence. If you want to know how long the screen has been around, here's this. It's an unfortunately non-functional Samsung model from 2012, and it has the exact same screen. 11.6 inches at 768p. This is probably a screen size that saves the most power, and being TN, they're very cheap to produce. And if you're producing literally millions of these at the same time, the per unit price gets cheap enough that you can justify selling Chromebooks like these for under $100 even new. Below the screen is a plasticky chiclet keyboard, which is awful to be honest. But at least it's good for basic note-taking, although I deliberately did not use this laptop to type up the script because I couldn't take it. Just below that is a not-so-awful trackpad. It's reasonably sized considering the footprint of this machine, although it's predictably plastic and the clicking is soft and mushy. But it tracks reasonably smoothly due to the layer they put on top of the plastic, and it's not awful for what it is. Speaking of plastic though, you'll find a lot of it on this machine. The only metal is used for structural components like the hinges, and so that way the laptop doesn't physically flex out like this. It's actually kind of strong. It's like surprising. One neat quirk about this machine is that it's actually an education model, which means that it gets this neat, nifty rubber ring around the perimeter, which basically protects it from drops and being cracked. This Chromebook was likely used by students for several years, and the fact that it's still existing all this time later is pretty fascinating to me. Normal laptops are not designed to take this type of abuse. And if anything ever did break on this machine, servicing this laptop is remarkably easy. All you have to do is remove a few screws on the bottom, and unlike most traditional laptops where the bottom would then come off, the keyboard comes off instead, revealing the insides. This is a genius design, as the keyboard is the part most likely to see damage in its lifetime. The second most likely part is the screen, which appears to be just as easy to replace. The battery and motherboard also come off in unified pieces, making repairs on this device stupidly easy. Speaking of that motherboard though, this laptop is sparse with I/O. Although being a Chromebook, it's still a respectable configuration. You get 2 USB-A's, an SD card reader, HDMI, and a headphone jack. Although I've never found myself loading this thing up with peripherals and tons of devices, and really, why would you? This thing is at its peak by itself. One port you won't be needing so often is the DC-in jack, as the battery life on this thing is surprisingly good. Even at 86% health, which is what my laptop stands at, it still lasts well over 9 hours of battery. And if you replace this thing with a new battery unit, you get well over 12 hours easy. I never think about having the charger with me or wondering if it'll last a full day. And this is something you'll not find at a lower price point on most Windows laptops, which is mostly due to the heavier Windows operating system, but also because they're usually packing more power-hungry hardware in the first place. It's not ideal. However, I think we should address the elephant in the room about this whole laptop, the price tag. It's a little bit too good to be true, right? A fully working laptop for 30 bucks? Well, this is where we get into the catch. You see, companies and schools buy new computers every 5 or 6 years, standardizing their orders, and they toss out the old ones regardless of their condition or performance. But with Chromebooks, they have an expiry date straight out of the box. If you go onto Google's auto update policy website and look at the Chromebook list, you can see that this laptop, the HP G511 Education Edition, expired on June 2022, which means that this laptop is freshly out of date. This computer will never see an update ever again. It might not seem that bad, but for example, with the Samsung Chromebook I showed earlier, it lost support in 2018, which doesn't seem like it was that long ago, but the older Chrome 68 style and the features that newer Chrome versions have added makes it feel like a frankly out-of-date experience. For security reasons, schools essentially recycle, sell off, or throw away old Chromebooks. And that's how I imagine many of these Education Edition Chromebooks got onto the market. And since they're already outdated and there's a huge supply of them, sellers are willing to let them go for cheap, even sometimes at a loss. Because at the end of the day, if I was a seller, I'd have a huge warehouse of these Chromebooks, right? I'd want them gone at any point possible. I mean, I even have first-hand experience with this. Last year, I helped the IT people at my school haul out dozens of 2013 iMacs simply because of the announcement that it wouldn't get macOS Monterey. Nothing changed about the functionality of the computer themselves, but they had to be replaced to meet standards. It's somewhat disappointing, but it's also the price we pay for security. So to wrap up this video, I originally wanted to run some games via the Google Play Store and the Android apps, but unfortunately the 16GB SSD in this laptop is literally too small to fit anything meaningful on it. I did test some web games, but predictably those run fine, as they have since like 2008. But all in all, I say that this laptop isn't good, but what it is dirt effing cheap. And if you're on a budget, then I wouldn't consider this a bad option at all, considering it's done everything I needed to, albeit slowly. So without any further ado, this is Calc G, out.